Hey, welcome to Q&A, where you ask your questions on faith and life, and I do my best to give a biblical perspective. Well, we are going to jump straight into today's question. Do you think it's possible to be moral and virtuous without being a Christian? If so, what is sin? Short answer is absolutely. I think it is possible. In fact, I know it to be so, that you can be moral and virtuous and not have a faith in Jesus Christ. You know most likely people who live life with integrity, who conduct themselves in a virtuous way, who are very moral, but don't believe. Sadly, the opposite's true as well. You probably know people who profess a faith in Jesus Christ, and yet they lack integrity and they don't always conduct themselves very, very morally. So yes, it's possible to be moral and virtuous without being a Christian. But the fact that we can see that contrast between the two, as I mentioned, it begs, I think, another question. What makes something moral? Who decides where the boundaries are? And increasingly, it's been argued that we get to decide. Certainly, modern society says that we decide for ourselves. Each generation gets to wrestle with this idea of where the boundaries are, what's in, what's out, what's right, what's not, for ourselves. And that's why over recent times we've seen some things that we never thought would change, because people have said, no, it's very subjective, and we'll determine for ourselves where those boundaries are. Of course, I think that if we take a step back, then there's another question that's got to be answered. If morality is subjective, if we get to decide for ourselves, why is it that, for example, a tribe in the highlands of New Guinea would agree with, say, German society that murder's wrong? One's had the benefit of being cradled by a Western culture and Christianity, and there's so many of the values that have enabled society to prosper and to grow in ways that generate security and hope and everything else. And the other knew nothing of that. Yet they both agree that murder's wrong. Why? Well, I think a good way of looking at it or understanding it perhaps is to think about what C.S. Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity. If you've never read Mere Christianity, it's a great book, and I encourage you to read it. But in there, when it comes to morals from memory, he talks about two qualities of morality. The first is that it's objective. And it makes sense. For example, people who perhaps in your workplace, perhaps people you socialize with, who would argue morality is subjective. We get to decide for ourselves. And yet when push comes to shove, that all flies out the window. For example, two people are having a discussion. One feels that the other has been rather unjust towards them, and they accuse them of being harsh, of being not caring, and all those sorts of things. Really, does the person who's being accused defend themselves by rejecting the notion of fairness or anything like that? Rather, they seek to show why their behaviour is an exception to the rule, how they weren't actually offending against a standard, an objective standard. And so in Mere Christianity, he unpacks that, but I think his point's valid, that no matter what we say about it being subjective, we get to decide for ourselves. We end up appealing to something that is objective when we're questioned, when we're pushed, or when we feel that someone else has trumped what we feel is our right. So it just points that there's more than subjectivity. There has to be a degree of objectivity. But the other thing he says in his book, Mere Christianity, is that not only is morality objective, but it's universal. That every culture, irrespective of where it is, of its underpinnings, whether it be a tribe in the highlands of New Guinea or whether it be high German society, they have this code of conduct, these standards that they expect everybody to uphold. Now, while specific morals within that framework may differ, it doesn't change the fact that they have this moral code, which suggests that morality is not something that's been invented, that we invented it, but somehow the idea of having core beliefs is is ingrained. It's part of who we are. Where did that come from? Well, of course, as a Christian, I'm going to argue 10 times out of 10 that it's woven into the fabric of creation by the Creator, by God. The Psalms say, we're fearfully and wonderfully created in His image. And so that moral code, that sense of right and wrong, that there is right, that there is wrong, that there is something bigger than ourselves, is woven into us by God because it's part of His nature. And that's why it's universal. And that's why I say that it's possible to be moral and virtuous without being a Christian. So I hope that makes sense. And then, of course, the second part of your question was, what is sin? Well, if God has woven morality into the fabric of creation, into you and I, then it helps us understand that sin is when we push back against that. My definition of sin is sin is anything that comes between us and God and us and those around us. In other words, when we offend against the values, the standards, the boundaries of God, then we're separating ourselves from God. We're separating ourselves from one another. And so it's something that's objective, not simply subjective, in the sense that it's objective and that it's not grounded in us. It's grounded in the Creator of the heavens and the earth. So that's how I see sin. It's subjective in the sense that it's anything that comes between you and I and between we and God. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. We could go on for ages talking about this, but just as a brief overview, once over, I hope that sort of shed some direction. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below, or drop us a line. But hey, if you've got questions on faith and life, jump over to slido.com, use the hashtag askhamish. Love to hear from you. But that's it for now. Until next time, God bless.